Hello, we are almost live, so if everyone could please take their seat. We will be live in 2 minutes, so if everyone could please take their seat. There is time after the event out in the hallway where we have lunch for more conversations. Thanks so much. So welcome to today's policy seminar on building more inclusive and natural resource secure food futures. We have both a large in-person crowd and of course an even larger online crowd. And so you're all invited to, as we go along, to put questions in the chat and the Q&A, and we'll also take questions and answer questions later on. In a world of increasing interlocking crisis and rapidly worsening inequities, building more inclusive and natural resource secure food futures is ever more elusive, as evidenced by rapidly declining biodiversity and rapidly increasing food insecurity. There's also growing consensus that governance and institutions and doubling down on equity and justice are critical to address these challenges. Throughout her career, Ruth Meinzen-Dick has made path-breaking contributions to both of these areas. Her research encompasses land and water policy, property rights, collective action, and games for experiential learning, with a long-standing focus on improving equity and justice. This policy seminar highlights her research contributions and examines how the impact of research on natural resources and women's empowerment can be strengthened through interventions in knowledge, motivation, and agency. Going forward, we will tap into 3 of the areas where Ruth has made major contributions, and that will be followed by a policy panel and finally Q&A. And the 3 areas that we will touch upon now are gender and equity, collective action, property rights and institutions, and capacity sharing, and education and training, mentorship. So those are the 3 areas. And with no further ado, I would like to now introduce our first speaker in the area of gender and equity. And the speaker is also, again, I'm sure, known to everyone here, our own Agnes Quisumbing, who's a senior research fellow at IFPRI, and she will talk to us, I think, about some of the measurement and tools around gender and equity. Thanks so much. Please welcome Agnes to the stage.
Claudia, thank you for asking me to talk about Ruth's contributions to gender research. I did not choose the title of this seminar, of this presentation, but I thought, you know, if I were to make this, if I were to come up with a title myself, I would have called it How Ruth Meinzen-Dick Changed Minds and Hearts. Because she indeed changed the course of my life when she was the person who invited me to come to IFPRI almost 30 years ago. So you can either thank her or blame her. Next slide, please. So one of Ruth's most recent achievements, or more recent achievements, has been the co-creation of the Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index and its variants, which as of this month, December 2024, has around 257 users in 63 countries. I never know the exact count because it keeps growing. Yet, it's rarely known that when USAID approached Ruth and me to commission the creation of the WEA, we were very reluctant about it. We said no at first. We were not index people. Ruth was a qualitative person. What did a qualitative person have to do with creating a multidimensional index of women's empowerment? But she changed her mind, and I'm so glad she did. We all did. Her approach to the WEA highlights her contributions not just to measurement, but to gender research at IFPRI. So next slide, please. So in the many years that I've worked with Ruth, she always brought with her the qualitative perspective, using her background in sociology to understand the nuances in behavior that is not well captured by numbers. In many cases, this meant we had to understand what women themselves valued. How did women and men see what it meant to be empowered? Next slide, please. So perhaps because of her qualitative training, she had an unusual ability to listen to what people valued in their own words. This was best illustrated in the qualitative protocols that were part of the development of the project-level Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index. Qualitative work shaped our understanding that power within, power to, and power with were valued parts of empowerment, but not power over, which was viewed as coercive and therefore not desired. Next slide, please. Ruth was idealistic, but she was also pragmatic. If she weren't pragmatic, we would not have been able to arrive at consensus in choosing and validating indicators for WEA, and the recently launched Women's Empowerment Metric for National Statistical System. So this is a picture of us at the launch of Women's. And I will quote from her that we need to ensure that changes in the welfare of women are assessed as core elements of that success, not just desirable or optional byproducts. In that case, imperfect indicators of women's empowerment may be better than no indicators at all. We have struggled in working with people for whom only the perfect is worth aiming for. But if we let the perfect be the enemy of good enough, we will never get anywhere, and we will never get to influence policy. Next slide, please. Ruth also brought a sense of community. Many of you will recognize yourselves in these pictures. No matter where Ruth was, she created communities, many of which are represented here today. And this is largely because of her last contribution. Next slide, please. Ruth's biggest contribution to IFPRI was her gift of her entire self. All of it, her love for her family, her struggles balancing parenting while traveling, her strong sense of justice, her passion for the people she loved and the people we serve, her friendship and collegiality. Ruth modeled for many younger women what it was like to balance or to try to balance all of this and how to change the workplace so that people could bring their full selves to the mission. So thank you, Ruth, and thank you to her family. Thank you to Carol, to Laura, and Kevin, who gave permission, by the way, for their pictures to be used here, for sharing this gift of Ruth with all of us.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Agnes. I think that was a great overview of Ruth's contributions to tools and measurements on gender and equity. And we now move on to the second area and on gender that Ruth heavily influenced and informed. And we will hear from Professor Cheryl Doss. She has an illustrious career. I mean, I can't describe all of it, but currently she's a professor of economics at Tufts University. So over to you, Cheryl, please.
Great, thank you. I am honored and just delighted to be here today. When I started trying to think about what are Ruth's contributions in the area of women's land rights for rural poverty, it got really hard for me to try to figure out which pieces actually were Ruth's contributions and which pieces came out of all of the collaborative work that we did together. So I really started to think about it as there being kind of two pieces. One is a very strong intellectual piece that Ruth contributed to, and I'm going to talk about some of that. But the other piece of it in all of this work is that she always managed to bring together a lot of different people, a lot of different voices together, so that the final kinds of work and where we are in this today is a result of both of those, of Ruth's intellectual contributions and her ability to bring together a wide range of people to have these conversations and to really talk about what's going on. Next slide. So when I first started working with Ruth on issues around women's land and property rights, I think in 2007, we both started with this idea, kind of a deep knowledge that women's land rights in particular were important. But we didn't come to it, and Ruth in particular didn't come to it with the idea that we had the answer. We know that property rights are important, and let's just go and find the evidence to support it. But instead, a whole set of questions. We know that women's land rights are important, but in what ways? What do we have to understand about women's land rights in order to see the ways in which they actually affect poverty reduction and all the other things that we care about? So this is one piece of collaborative work that we did, trying to understand how women's land rights affect poverty reduction. And you'll see that there's no direct line from land rights to poverty reduction, but that it flows through all of these different pieces of things. And so there's good evidence for lots of the solid lines, but that you have to have a holistic perspective to be able to understand how they fit together. Next slide, yeah. I think one of the things that became really clear early and that Ruth was often asked us to think about is that if we're thinking about women's land rights, we have to think about much more than just that women own their own plot of land. That property rights is more than that. That may be important, that may be really good, but that alone is not women having strong property rights. And that land rights are much more complex than that, and that we have to think about these bundles of rights. How do the bundles of rights fit together? Who has which of the rights? So multiple people may have different rights to the same plot of land, and how do we start to make sense of that? Next slide. One of the key ways is to really start to understand how property rights and land rights may be held either individually, so a woman having a plot of her own, but if we only look at women having plots of their own, we miss and would not try to understand what happens when women own property, have property rights jointly. And for private property, typically the person that women have property rights with is with their husband. And so trying to understand what does it mean to have joint property rights with your husband? We know that lots of times women are joint owners and they don't have equal rights. They don't have the same claims and the same voice. But they often do have some claims and some voice. And so how do we understand those pieces of it? And to really understand that the strength of those rights and the tenure security depends on a range of things. The legal system, social norms, but also family and intra-household dynamics. But we can't just think about women's property rights on private land, which is what the women's land rights people often do. We also have to think about women's property rights on collective lands, and how do we ensure what has to happen for women to have property rights and secure tenure on collective lands. And so more recent work that a number of us in the room have been doing together has really pulled and shown that what it takes for women to have secure property rights on collective lands is that first, the group, whether it's the forestry group or the rangeland management group, has to have secure tenure. But then women also have to have a voice within the governance of those organizations. So it's a little bit like the households, right? Where for within households, the household has to have secure tenure, that nobody's going to take away the land from the household, but then women have to have voice and rights within the household. And the same is true on collective lands. And finally, one of the things that Ruth has brought, and Agnes mentioned this too, is this strong notion that to understand any of these issues, we have to use mixed methods. We have to have deep respect for both qualitative methods and quantitative methods, because when you put them together, you learn all kinds of things that you can't learn from just one or the other. And so that in order to understand and continue to understand how women's land rights lead to poverty reduction, we have to continue to use these mixed methods. So just a thank you to Ruth for all of her contributions and for all of the ways that she's challenged many of us to think about all of these issues. And I know she's going to keep working on these even though she's done, because we've still got projects we're working on. So I'm really excited to have been part of this big learning about these issues, and to have Ruth be one of the people who's been teaching and working and collaborating with me all of these years.
Thanks so much for laying out, I think, the very, very important land rights and gender work that is still, I think, growing in terms of the understanding of how essential it is to achieve change, especially now with land degradation, climate change, biodiversity. We just had the 3 COPs, and each of these COPs had events on land rights and gender, and I think each of them cited some of Ruth's work. Now we're moving over into the second area of Ruth's contributions that we want to touch upon today, and that is work on property rights, collective actions, and natural resources management. And our first speaker in this slot, or actually our speaker in this slot, is Mark Rosegrant. He is currently a research fellow emeritus. He also probably doesn't need any introduction. He has been a long-term researcher at IFPRI and of course some other institutions as well, and has himself made very important contributions, essential contributions on water and natural resources, and he will tell us a bit more about this is interlinked and how Ruth has contributed to this topic. Over to you, Mark, please.
Thanks, Claudia. So Ruth joined IFPRI in 1989. And I left in 2018, so we were colleagues for 29 years here. And in fact, of course, when you're a colleague of Ruth, you're always a colleague. You only have to be working together. And as you already heard, she's a wonderful colleague, as all of us in the room know. We share many research interests, but the one where we had the most interaction always was water management and water rights. So I'm going to talk about some of Ruth's work in this area and a bit on subsequent work by me and others addressing Ruth's points. So way back in 2007, Ruth wrote a great paper called Beyond Panaceas in Water Institutions. And she pointed out here that research and policy on water management has followed 3 broad overlapping trends over the last, really, since the 1950s. The first focused on the central role of the state. The second focused on the scope for user or community management. And the third focused on a larger role for water rights and market institutions. Wittfogel wrote a classic book in 1957 with the politically incorrect title of Oriental Despotism, but he pointed out there that building and running large-scale irrigation systems needed a strong political and social structure to pull together labor, money, and other resources to build and run the systems. These systems, and in fact, many systems in Asia, US, and elsewhere still follow this model. They had extensive canals and storage and relied on strong government agencies. But by the 1970s and 80s, though, it was clear that through a lot of research that many state-run systems were not meeting expectations. They irrigated far less than planned, with some areas facing water shortage and others dealing with waterlogging. Maintenance was poor, service delivery was weak, and farmers weren't paying fees consistently. Attempts at early reforms on these state agencies focused on improving water bureaucracies, offering more training, bigger budgets, for maintenance or financial independence, but the results in many cases were disappointing. As it became clear that these systems were not running well, researchers, mostly in Asia, highlighted the strong performance of existing farmer management systems and questioned the idea that a strong state was necessary to build and run irrigation. So at this point, farmer-led management and water user associations emerge as promising alternatives. But an attempt to broaden that through state-led efforts to create water user associations in the image of these effective traditional models often impose rigid top-down structures, which also didn't work well. Research subsequently focused, some of Ruth's work and others, on what makes water user associations succeed, involving members in the design and focus on better water delivery rather than just fees helps. Decentralized irrigation associations also tend to solve problems like free riding and disputes better than these centrally controlled ones that were established by the state. Water user associations that have the authority to make and enforce rules, like setting water charges, or hiring staff, do better. They see greater farmer participation, fewer outside conflicts, and better maintenance compared, again, to the government-controlled systems. Other studies showed that water user associations work better when farmers elect their own governing boards, professional staff handle management, and clear water rights and water usage monitoring are in place. And given these results, again, the mixed results of WUAs and what seems to make them work better, then thinking also turned on how to use incentives to improve water management, starting with water pricing systems. Water pricing systems work relatively well for domestic and industrial water use, but for irrigation, especially in developing countries, water pricing is ineffective in most cases. It's complex to implement and enforce, and it's punitive to poor farmers, with prices high enough to significantly reduce water use being unaffordable. A better approach is to establish water rights and pay farmers to cut back on water use instead of charging them directly, or alternatively, to trade water rights. And here Ruth and I depart a little bit. I'm a little more favorable to water markets than she is, but I actually moved quite a bit towards her, I think, over time. So water rights themselves are, in fact, a key to fair and efficient water use. They give users better control by requiring consent for water reallocation and ensuring compensation when water is transferred. Secure, well-defined rights encourage investment in water-saving tools and better farming techniques, like upgrading irrigation or diversifying into new crops. Making water rates tradable also has the potential to provide greater incentives for efficient water use, letting farmers earn extra income by selling and saved water and incentivizing water-saving technologies like drip irrigation and precision farmers. But even in developed countries, creating water rights and trading systems has been challenging. In developing countries, the hurdles are even bigger. High costs for monitoring water use, weak infrastructure and institutions, and large irrigation systems serving many farmers increase implementation costs. Given the difficulty of this task, development of well-specified water rights and trading in most developing countries is likely to be a medium or longer-term process. But in the meantime, an initial focus on realistic allocation of water on a seasonal basis, together with registration of water rights, including customary rights, based on shares of water in the river basin, would be a major first step. Establishing better physical controls of water usage, including rationing or quotas through enforcement of water rights, would generate benefits now and also enable longer-term developments of water markets. Just to wrap up, as Ruth noted, there are no panaceas in water management. Institutional approaches need to be pragmatic in seeking solutions that are effective within the physical, social, and governance context of specific locations. Focusing solely on one, whether it's public, community-based, or markets, overlooks the potential benefits of combining them. Water management may work better by combining or picking and choosing amongst the best main types, depending on location. The state, for example, might handle the upper reaches of large-scale systems. User groups focusing on smaller local systems with farmers managing things at the field level, underpinned by water rights. As Ruth wrote, a balanced tripod of state, community, and market-based systems tailored to local conditions likely works best. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think this was excellent, an excellent description of Ruth's contribution to work on water as a key natural resource. And just coming from another event where it was clarified again that last year was the driest water year on record, and we're last year. And so this year it's already competing for being the driest year on record. So getting institutions right to have access to water, especially for the poorest, is becoming more and more important. So we're really moving, as Gutierrez said, on the highway to hell, and we're pressing the accelerator, especially on water, but of course also on other natural resources. So again, bringing home the importance of the institutional work on water, I think that Ruth and others and collaborators have contributed to. Unfortunately, our next presenter who would have, I think, explained that yet further, how he used the research and the co-designed research of Ruth Meinzen-Dick and also the research of other CGR centers and other partners to implement, strengthened and improved commons management in India. That presenter is Dr. Jagdish Rao, who was the CEO of the Foundation of Ecological Security and is currently the CEO of Living Landscapes and convener of Common Ground. He's unfortunately unable due to feeling unwell, and so he just said he will not be able to talk. So we were not able to get a video from him either because he just felt ill yesterday. But just to say in a few words, so some of the things you've heard on gender and land rights, property rights and collective action. So there's the theory, but there's also the implementation. And so Ruth has worked with countless groups, but particularly with Foundation for Ecological Security to actually see these concepts brought to fruition, and particularly in India through the Promise of the Commons initiative that Foundation for Ecological Security has started, has used these tools and concepts to actually restore millions of hectares of commons lands. And again, those are land and other resources and resource rights that now communities have access to and management decisions over, and they actually have, as a result of that, increased biodiversity, resilience during COVID-19 pandemic, et cetera. So there's really dramatic change happening on the ground through implementing many of those concepts, tools, and also experiential games on the ground. But we will unfortunately not hear some of that testimony right now, but I'm sure you can find it online and can read up later on that. I also would like to remind everyone again, especially online, that you can add questions to the presenters that you have heard up to now in the either the Q&A function or the chat function. And of course, people who follow through other channels can also add their questions. And we are now coming into the third and final research contribution segment. And that's focusing on from mentorship to capacity sharing. And when Mark said that he has moved a little bit from water markets to I guess, property rights and collective action. And obviously the same has happened to me. So started to work on global water and food modeling. And now sometimes I'm outed or identified as a gender researcher, and that certainly has only happened because of Ruth Meinzen-Dick. So yeah, I definitely didn't start out thinking I would work on equity and institutions, also not. I was a very quantitative modeler. So yeah, I've also moved over to the dark side maybe. And I've seen the light. But anyway, so with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our next presenter in the area of mentorship and capacity sharing. It's Professor Peter Mollinga. He's currently a senior fellow at the Center for Development Research. He's joining us through a video message because he had some flight challenges in India, and he's now on a flight, so he was able to send us a video message. He was also supposed to share this slot with François Moll, who is the Director of Research, Institut de Recherche pour le Développement. And together, Ruth, François, and Peter started out a completely new journal, just to buck the trend of expensive fees and interest, and to simplify review processes and, make access to water and water research open access, freely available to everyone. So she started that new journal, which I think is an important part of her mentorship and capacity sharing. And we'll hear a little bit about that now from Peter. Thanks so much.
From India appropriately, given both our backgrounds. I'm very sorry that I can't appear even live in the meeting, not even online. Some logistical problems prevented it at the last moment. So I'll be very brief and short, and just want to say a virtual hello and thank you for your contribution to Water Alternatives, of which François, you and I are the founding editors and will be forever, even when we are all in the process of retiring now. So in terms of the theme of this conference, this workshop, what is has been the impact of water alternatives? Frankly speaking, we don't really know, and we wouldn't know really how to measure it. But if we would have been a externally funded project, we would have probably have reported some metrics like approaching the 100,000 downloads per month, and things like that. So we can only hope that the impact is there, and I think we can certainly, all three of us, including yourself, can be very proud of having been part of the establishment of the journal, and I can speak on behalf of François here, who's traveling in Chile, by the way, and also can't be here online. We would like to thank you very much for your eminent contribution in the first period of Water Alternatives, and without that it would not have become such a success as we think it presently is. Of course, good things come to an end. I mean, one of the thoughts that occurred to me when I was thinking about this intervention or this contribution is that with our retirements, I've already retired from SOAS, François will retire from IRD in Montpellier before long, and at a certain moment we'll also stop our leadership in the water alternatives thing. It's the kind of the Cornell, Wageningen and Montpellier era of water scholarship is somewhat coming to an end, and a new generation is taking over. I think that's a good thing. So many things have happened in critical water scholarship in the past 20 years, and we shouldn't become dinosaurs. Still, I think we are entitled to say jointly, and particularly to you, thank you very much for the contribution and the excellent and very pleasant collaboration. And I hope we will speak before long bilaterally to discuss a little bit more. The picture, by the way, is from the place where I am. I photographed it today. It's a wall painting in Jodhpur in India, and I think the Women and Water team was at least represented here. I hope you keep us sending us more papers on that theme, or directing more papers on that theme to Water Alternative as well. Thank you very much and have an excellent meeting. Sorry I can't be there live or in person. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks so much, Peter, from afar. He's supposed to be on a plane now, hopefully. Yeah, I think that was an excellent contribution and obviously invitation to everyone, right? I think most of us are researchers, but this is, Water Alternative is an alternative journal. It's open to policymakers, practitioners. It's really a very accessible journal. And so this was a call to please keep submitting your great contributions to this journal. Another organization or another component of mentorship and capacity sharing that Ruth has contributed to, but we will not feature here because we couldn't fit it in, is the International Land Coalition. I was just at the UNCCD COP in Riyadh, and I met the current director, Mike Taylor, and he said, Ruth's research has really affected everything that this International Land Coalition is about. Ruth is the reason of why IFPRI was the only founding member from CGIAR to the International Land Coalition. Now, of course, CGIAR has joined as a whole, I think about a year ago. This coalition has more than 250 organizations, and again, I do not think it would be what it is today without the contributions from Ruth Meinzen-Dick. So it's just another contribution, and I'd like to get a hand on that because really I was impressed to see this coalition work in practice. I mean, they're there to step in when land rights are violated, which is something that's happening every second of every day. But now we move over to yet another international coalition or group or association that Ruth was also yet another one that she was essential for its constitution. And we will hear about that association from Professor Marco Janssen. He is currently at Arizona State University at the School of Sustainability and the College of Global Futures. So great title. So Marco, if you could tell us a little bit about Ruth's contribution to yet another so far unnamed association. Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. Sorry that I am not be able to hear in person. So yeah, I would like to talk about Ruth's contribution to the International Association for the Study of the Commons, the IAC, and that's a leading professional association dedicated to the commons. It was established 35 years ago and brings together scholars, practitioners, and policymakers to exchange knowledge and find solutions for better governance of the commons. So Ruth played a vital role in the leadership of the IAC in the last 25 years. She was a member of the council from 2000 to 2006, and then she became president-elect. And she was president of the IAC from 2008 to 2011. And that was during a pretty hectic period of the IAC with quite a number of highs and lows. So, 2008 had a financial crisis, and that had a major impact on the IAC. And luckily, Ruth was there to, in a way, shepherd the IAC through a reorganization to be able to continue actually having a organization on collective action requires a lot of collective action, maybe more than other organizations. So also the IAC secretary needed to find a new home, which moved to Yunnan at the time. At the moment, it's we at Arizona State University are hosting the secretariat. And Ruth was able to lead the IAC through this transition. So her ability to handle the crisis situation might be due to her focus on practical solutions, as mentioned also earlier by some speakers, instead of focusing on big ideas, which is not uncommon in academics. So just with ideas, you don't come very far. You need to also focus on some of the practicalities. There were also major highlights during this period. The founding president of the IAC, Mark Rosegrant, received a Nobel Prize for her work, and the IAC was acknowledged to play an important role in this achievement by strengthening, promoting the scholarship on the commons. And Lynn Austin was very upfront to say that she was not receiving this just by her own contribution, by the contributions of the community. And I had a slide, I hope this can be shown. The 2011 Global ISC conference was held in Hyderabad, India. And Ruth mentioned in her presidential speech that a dream came true to have this conference in the country she grew up in. She was also able to connect the conference with major players, such as the Minister of the Environment and Forest, Sri Jairam Ramesh, which is in the picture of the slide. And I guess you may also recognize Eleanor Ostrom in the middle. As well as the Prime Minister of India, which they met during the time, I think just before the conference. So after 12 years of official leadership positions with the ISC, she still remained involved in advising the ISC and helping organizing ISC events and initiatives. She, in that way, start mentoring the next generation of people involved in leadership positions. And I recall vividly when Ruth and also former president of the ISC, Tina de Moor, cornered me in Utrecht in 2016 to, they volunteered me to be the next president-elect, and which I was initially not eager to do, but thank you, Ruth, for trusting me that I could do a reasonable job on that, and thanks for the support and mentoring of Ruth. I was able to fulfill my duties in leadership positions of the ISC, and I'm sure I've not been the only one who has benefited from Ruth's mentorship and willingness to be a sounding board for ISC leaders, how to deal with academic and organizational challenges like the ISC experience over the years. Although Ruth will now retire, I'm sure we will see her in future events. So yeah, I hope to see at least Ruth in the next ISC conference in Massachusetts in June. And with that, thank you, Ruth, for all your help and guidance through the different activities we have done also together for the ISC.
Yeah, thank you, Marco, for this excellent description of what the IASC is about, and also, you know, to describe the importance of collective action to actually not only start such an organization, but to also keep it alive. So I think that's great to hear, and again, also to learn about Ruth's contribution to that. We now move to the third and final, or I guess fourth area and final area of this policy seminar, and we now want to say, okay, you know, there have been a lot of contributions in different areas, but how can we yet further increase the impact of this research on natural resources and women's agency? And this slot has two contributions. One, we will hear from Ruth herself, a few reflections, I think, of her work, or on her work, and maybe also where she thinks we should be going. We've heard a lot of people are retiring. I'm also moving in that direction, but I guess I'm not quite allowed to do that yet. So yeah, we will hear some words of wisdom, I think, from Ruth, and that will be followed by a policy panel that will be ably moderated by Steve Lawry, and I think we'll have several panelists who will also come in on that same topic. You know, where do we need to go from here? But now first, please over to Ruth and give her an applause, because this is really all due to her work.
Wow. Oops. Get my timer going. Okay, I'm just going to try. Wing it. Yeah. Thank you doesn't begin to say it. So over the years, I've been working on these two themes that often seem separate, and it's been wonderful to see how they come together so much more now. And on the next slide, I guess on the theme of making an impact, and especially research making an impact, it's been so wonderful being at IFPRI, where were allowed to do both research and really challenged to say, but how does it apply? I've been an interdisciplinary researcher throughout my career. I was fortunate to have training at Cornell in a department and at a time when we were not just allowed but encouraged to go to take classes and meet with and talk with people from other disciplines. So I learned a lot from my tropical crops class and my soils class, minored in ag econ, have a pretty strong quantitative set of analytics skills, which saved me when I came into IFPRI. When I came to IFPRI, I was the only sociologist, and I have been for most of my time here. I'm really glad I'm no longer the only one. And I remember when Gordon Conway was on the IFPRI board, and IFPRI was suggesting that maybe IFPRI could become a little bit more, go beyond just having ag economists. And Gordon said he thought it was a good idea, but based on his experience as Chancellor of the University of Sussex, it wouldn't be an easy thing. There would be some tensions. It wouldn't come without a struggle. And he was right. My best interdisciplinary collaborations, including with Mark, have been, I finally figured it out, creative tensions. And whether they were creative tensions or just tension headaches, all came down to whether there was mutual respect. And that just is such a treasure, because then it lets you start to listen to the other person. And I've had this opportunity to work with amazing people. Then it's been increasingly from interdisciplinary to transdisciplinary. That is research that transcends disciplinary boundaries in order to achieve an impact, and goes beyond just researchers to do so, involving others in the process. And it's really unfortunate that Jagdish couldn't join, because that's been one of those really amazing experiences, you know, of that mutual learning with Foundation for Ecological Security, and actually with Marco on developing games, Marco bringing in how to develop games that then we could try and have an impact with. What I love about this work is the connecting of ideas and people, which is where some of the best aha moments come from. Cheryl's absolutely right. This isn't just Ruth. It's every single thing that I think of as a big accomplishment. I can think of who were those people at those aha moments that made that happen. And being able to spend time in the field and seeing things firsthand and talking them over, I think isn't just important for impact, it enriches theory as well. Some of the real highlights for me have been working on these conceptual frameworks that have served as boundary objects. They're used in different ways by different communities for collaborative work. They help translate the abstract theoretical concepts into something that non-specialists can understand and apply themselves. So I want to give you briefly three examples. So the first, one of the great delights of my time here was the CGIAR program on collective action and property rights. Started back when my son was a baby, so I could, 30 years ago. We were often asked, and it was the first system-wide program in the CGIAR that involved all 15 centers. It was actually 16 for a brief moment. We were often asked why CGIAR, which was seen as a technology and food production organization, should be concerned with these abstract issues. This graph, or this framework, was our answer. If you think about most technologies or natural resource management practices, on the time scale and the spatial scale. Annual crops are down in that bottom corner. They're easy. But if you're talking about managing your soil carbon or planting trees, it's long-term, and you can't do it by you need to worry about the tenure because you don't have the incentive or the authority to make that investment. If you move above the level of the farm, integrated pest management, you get the returns within a season, but you can't do it by yourself. You have to have coordination. And most of those things up above, I have lots of different variants of this, are commons that Marco just was talking about. And the coordination can be by collective action or the state, and it's how do they work together. Now, this framework was an entry point then to get others to say, oh, okay, now tell us more about property rights. And then we go into what you were saying, it's not just who owns the title. On the next framework, this one is more recent. Under the Gender, Agriculture, and Assets Project, Phase 2, we were working with a portfolio of 13 agricultural development projects that said they were about empowering women. But when we looked in a little closer, most of them were just reaching women or maybe providing some benefits. But then we said, okay, but it's not just including them or increasing their well-being, but strengthening their ability to make strategic life choices and put those into action. And then finally, transform, changing the norms and structures. So for each of those, you need to think about different strategies and different indicators and who are the prime actors. Now, this framework has been kind of cool because now at least 7 donor organizations or development partners, NGOs and others, have picked this up as a way of screening projects. But very importantly, in trainings, we've had so many people say, oh, now I get it. Now I understand what empowerment is different. So that's another one. And then the third, very recently, under the CGIAR Nexus Gains, we were challenged to come up with a toolbox for groundwater governance. Building on the groundwater games that Marco helped us develop and FES has been implementing, but we've come to, there's a lot of tools out there. There are very few successful examples of groundwater governance that address the problems. So we flipped it. Instead of starting with the tools, start with identifying the key actors. And then what do they need? They need knowledge, and that's the ability to use information strategically to achieve one's objective. It's not just data, it's not just information, it has to be internalized. Motivation to address the problems, and we often focus on the external motivations. But regulations are financial, there are internal motivations too. How do we address that? And I think the games are an exciting way to do that. And then agency, the mechanisms to act. So I think this framework, we developed it for groundwater, but we think there's some other applications too of thinking about as a way of thinking about problems. Finally, in terms of research for impact, I guess the issues are making those connections between topics and ideas and people and institutions, but the real key is partnerships. The CAPRI program I mentioned is one. Claudia mentioned International Land Coalition. Marco, the International Association for Study of the Commons has been like my intellectual home for so many years. And Foundation for Ecological Security that I've been working with for 20 years. They've taken these principles on collective action and property rights as their core model that they're applying in at least 20,000 communities. They've with their partners, they've scaled our games to over 6,500 communities. But we can't do that by ourselves. It's all about partnerships. So I want many, many thanks to everyone who's been on this journey with me over the years, including my family, Carol, Laura, and Kevin, who are occasionally on the journeys with me. While I step back from this, I hope to continue staying involved with many of you in some way, but especially with the fantastic new leaders at IFPRI and elsewhere who are taking this up on natural resources and women's empowerment, and really exciting work on this. So thank you all very much.
Yeah, really excellent to, again, hone in on these key contributions and the important, and also, I guess, the passing this baton on to the next generation. So I think it's a big task. And from everything I've heard, what Ruth plans to do in retirement, I think Carol's smile is not as strong as he was at the beginning of the session. But that's okay. We'll get through it. He has gotten through it before. But now I'd like to hand over the baton to Steve Lawry. He is a senior associate with the Center for International Forestry Research and also World Agroforestry. And he is managing a panel discussion that also tries to hone in on how can we double down on impact, on increasing the impact of research on natural resources and equity. So please, over to you, Steve. Yeah, and you can then introduce the panelists as well. And I think we have one panelist online. Thank you. Over to you, Steve.
Great. Thanks. Thanks, Claudia. Thanks, Ruth. Can everyone hear me? No, I'm not on. Push. Okay, that's why I'm not on. Okay. We have to, I want to remind people, and this hasn't been mentioned yet, that Ruth was awarded the Eleanor Ostrom Prize for contributions to the field of common property studies in Lima, in the meeting in Lima, I think in 2019. I was privileged to be there. So this is another measure of the esteem our colleagues and others around the world have for her work. I want to, by way of just opening up the discussion, and we also, in addition to Victoria and Aslihan, have Vicki Wilde with us, make a few remarks that will help, I think, frame our discussion on Ruth's contributions to policy thinking and donor investments in reforms and initiatives that seek to take account of and make a good use of the research and ideas that she and her colleagues have offered in the area of common property and gender studies. So in a nutcase, as one friend put it to me, these are my 5 contributions of Ruth to the field. Okay, I'm just trying to boil it down here. All right, let's simplify things. To 5, yeah. Collective action is possible and necessary to solve our global problems in climate, agriculture, natural resources governance, and equity. Most common property institutions have been created endogenously. They're locally created. They are embedded in rural social systems to allocate resources and solve problems of rural social life. That was number 2. As institutions, they are generally effective at serving those purposes, but they are under stress, as are other institutions, from within and from outside. Collective and customary lands systems are, generally speaking, socially inclusive, but rights are based and defined in relationships, including in relationships between men and women, husbands and wives. And the character of those relationships empower or provide less power to individuals by virtue of their relationship to the rural social system. gender studies. People want to make decisions about their own, they want to make their own decisions about the future of their institutions, okay? But will naturally have different ideas among themselves about what those priorities and problems are. Now, those are the, I think, 5. I counted to 5. Now, these are all contributions. These ideas, this knowledge has enriched, one to wish not, well, unfortunately not always sufficiently, the thinking, the visions of donors when they look to engage in rural societies with the purpose of making things better. And when they account for Ruth's work, the outcomes are, and knowledge, the outcomes have a chance of being together, of being better. And so this is the questions we have today for Victoria, Vicki, and Aslihan, is how has your work in respectively USAID, the Gates Foundation, and the World Bank taken up this kind of, the Meinzen-Dick thinking? And what's the agenda for the future in terms of meeting needs and knowledge, really, that has not yet been realized? And so, in that case. So, Aslihan, can we start with you?
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen, and thanks, Claudia, for inviting me to be part of today and be able to celebrate Ruth's many years of contributions and thought leadership in gender, in property rights, and natural resource management, and collective action. The list is long. It's really like 20 years ago when I first started working on these topics that I got to learn a lot from your work, from Cheryl's work, and over the years had many opportunities to impart your wisdom, and more recently with our collaborations on gender, climate, and nutrition activity. But also I just realized we owe you and Agnes convincing each other that at USAID we get to really, day in and day out, really have we as an important tool for us to really work and learn from and influence our programs. And Stephen, coming back to that question, and I actually want to say, just as I was hearing everybody's sort of interventions, I realized a lot of what I will talk about, like how do we improve our impact of our research, especially around gender and women's agency and empowerment. I realize, Ruth, you've been a living example of what we need to do more of. So this will echo a lot of what we already talked about, starting with the fact that we need to do more interdisciplinary and integrated work. Crop science and social science coming together and really sort of challenging each other, creating common agendas and questions and sort of furthering research in that respect. And actually, I forgot the GCAN activity, and Elizabeth is here, I think. We just looked at our Innovation Labs investments in USAID, which is our big research investment in the ag space, as many of you know. And one thing that came out is that while we, I think, moved somewhat, we still lack that true integration of gender in our innovation lab agendas. And we're trying to improve that through our, more robust approach to gender analysis and other ways to take those analysis and recommendations into research. But it seems like we still need to do more work. And as you said, that's where impact really comes about. Another thing is, you mentioned the GAP2 activity project and how the RBET really came out of that in terms of building those linkages of like how do ag programs influence or impact women's empowerment, or how is women's agency contributing to stronger outcomes in our ag programs. So I think we need more of that causal sort of analysis and understanding the pathways, but I will come back to, again, one of, I think, spaces where your leadership was so important is the qualitative aspect. So we can't do just quantitative analysis. We really need to understand and nuance our quantitative research and some of our impact assessments and evaluations with that qualitative grounding and the nuance and the context coming in. And thirdly, again, it's top of mind for USAID is really leaning in and doing more locally informed and locally led research with our partners on the ground. And that is that co-creation, putting agendas together on research and learning priorities, and going back to the communities with our research. So not just being extractive, but really going back and working together to then inform what's happening at the policy space, program space. That's key for really increasing our impact, I would say. Stuff here.
Thanks so much, Aslihan. I'm going to ask Vicki, Wilde, is it Wilde or Wilda? Wilde, very good. If you could
It's wild.
It's wild, it's wild, okay.
It's wild.
It's wild,
Yes.
all right. So, of the
Yes,
Gates Foundation, please, Vicki, carry on.
Yes, and Ruth, I can't tell you how much I wish I was in the room with you. I'd be squeezing your neck right now. And congratulations and honoring your work and contributions. I'm calling in from Italy. And I was remembering when we first met, I don't know if you remember this, but we met in July of 1999. So it was about 25 years ago. I just joined the CGIR to lead the gender and diversity work, and you were one of the first people that I ran to get advice on what to do. And so naturally, I quickly recognized you not only as a leader for gender research, but also as a leading light for equity and gender issues in the workplace and our institutions. And I believe at the Gates Foundation that it's since 2007, 2008, that on top of all the things you all have been hearing about today, all the contributions around the world, on top of all of those things, Ruth has also served as a kind of collaborator and wise advisor to the Gates Foundation, along with Cheryl Doss, Agnes Quisumbing, Hazel, and others. But Ruth was there at the very beginning when the gender work in the Gates Foundation's agriculture team was fledgling. It was a cross-cutting issue. I am very happy to say that over the years, our women's empowerment focus became one of our top 4 goals. It became part of our whole theory of change, that it's women's empowerment plus nutrition gains and gains in productivity and income. Together, that's how you get change. So that's huge. And you've been a grantee, an expert reviewer, a wise advisor, and a friend every step of the way. And I'm pleased to say that at the Gates Foundation now, you all have probably seen that over the past several years, we not only have very strong gender work in our agriculture team, which is where it used to be only, we now have gender equality as a priority across the foundation, and we have a whole gender equality department set up, and it's part of our work in health, in financial services, WASH, nutrition, and everything, because it's now recognized as an enabler for all of our foundation goals. But I'm supposed to talk about policy. So I just wanted to mention 2 policy directions that I'm excited about, and I think that the body of work that Ruth has contributed to underpins these 2 new directions. And one is connecting the micro with the macro. Internally in our team, it is our practice to embed ProWEA indicators into the M&E systems of many of our investments, especially those that or in the independent evaluations of the investments that aim to be gender transformative. And therefore, cumulatively over the years, we're helping build out this body of evidence of the multiplier effects of what happens when you invest in women's agency in the agriculture sector. And now today, as we've been building this body of evidence, what I think is particularly exciting and impactful is when we connect this data to a government's own policies and its own programs. So for example, in Ethiopia, we're supporting 6 different directorates of the Ministry of Agriculture to successfully implement and operationalize a gender equality strategy for the agriculture sector. And we're drawing on the ProWea metrics to help track their impacts by sex, age, location, and value chain in the government's efforts, including commercialization zones where we want women to benefit fully. So by bringing this micro and macro work together, we're strengthening government capacity, but most importantly, we are upgrading women's opportunities. We're upgrading them to fully participate in more lucrative value chains. And we're doing this with partners that together deliver programming on the social norms and engaging both the men and the women, as well as bringing in climate adaptive agronomics. It's combining that social norm work with the technology work that we see tremendous impact and power. And second, just very briefly, policy direction I'm excited about is working with governments to prioritize their policy stack in a world of limited resources and so many things that need to be done better. What do you recommend? And thanks to years and years of investments in the ProWea and other key gender metrics, we finally have enough reliable data to feed into policy models, including IFPRI's RIAPA model. So this growing body of evidence, that shows that multiplier effect for productivity, income, nutrition, but also changes in women's mobility, market integration, the adoption of climate adaptive practices. These contribute to lowering poverty, to improving food security, and so forth. So we all know that policymakers and leaders, they want a silver bullet, right? And we all know the world's too complex for silver bullets. There's no such thing. But if there's one thing in the world that we could do to improve the agriculture sector, some of us would argue that it's investing in women's empowerment that might prove to be the silver bullet. In fact, we'd be hard pressed. We think you'd be hard pressed to make the case not to include women's empowerment in a country's policy stack of priorities. And where this needs to get more granular going forward is like really analyzing the ministry's budgets and capacities to determine, are they really investing in the areas where the data shows us would be most impactful. We've done this and we found that, the government was investing only in value chains where only men were participating, not investing in the value chains for women, and not investing in the things to adjust agriculture services to better serve the women. So this is important work in a direction where I think we need to connect the dots. So altogether, Ruth, I think more than ever, we understand the importance of bringing people together to reach common understandings and pursue shared goals. And your work on gender and land, gender and water, and other collective endeavors has taught us the importance of working with and listening to local organizations and the importance of using both the quantitative and qualitative methods, documenting not only what works or what's happening or not working, but the why. And thank you, thank you, thank you. It's one of our wise advisors behind the scenes that's had our back on this journey. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you, Vicki, for being with us. And now I'd like to ask Victoria Stanley, Senior Land Administration Specialist at the World Bank, to offer her remarks.
Well, thank you very much. And I first want to say how incredibly honored I am to be here looking at sort of my idols in the women's land rights space, which is also a bit daunting, and going last, of course, because I feel like so much has already been said that I don't want to repeat. I think at the World Bank where we always struggle is the concept of going to scale. So there's a lot of fantastic work that's done all over the world. And I look at it and I think, yeah, that's what we need to be doing, but I got to do it at the level of, Indonesia, I think it's 10 million parcels a day. They're at a scale that even I can't imagine. But, even some of our smaller operations, we're still trying to do millions of parcels. And so just thinking about that and knowing that there's this incredible body of research, but not only of research, but also of tools and investigation of how you can actually do it, has really been incredibly helpful for my work and for all of us at the World Bank. And I did not realize, Ruth, that you had actually been involved in creating the International Land Coalition, of course, which I now sit on the board of. So, another connection. And of course, the WIA and the pro-WIA we have used instrumentally in a lot of our work at the bank. So I don't really have a silver bullet. I think that a couple of very useful things have been mentioned in this conversation. But for me, what I have always taken away from any discussion with Ruth is ideas about where to go and find more information, and who else to talk to, and who to bring to the table. And I think it's been said by all of the presenters, her collaboration. But for me, it's not just the collaboration, it's also been the integration. So, if you need a model of how all of these different pieces work together, then you go to Ruth. Because she'll help you to pull it together into some synthesis that you can actually use, I think, in your operational work. So, for me, that's really the biggest thing. It's that collaboration and integration, that interdisciplinary curiosity, going across the boundaries, asking the questions, bringing the quant and the qualitative together, because the quantitative will only tell you what you don't know, and then you've got to go and ask why. And so I think all of those things I have learned from Ruth, and I'm so honored to have had the opportunity to work with her and to get to know her. So I'll stop there.
All right, back to Claudia.
It's back to me, but please, just stay seated because you might get some questions. I know we also have speakers, presenters, and online participants, presenters who might also get some questions, but I suggest, Ruth, please take a seat. And then we'll just wait and see what kind of questions we get in the room. So we'll try to start in the room. Please raise your hand. You can see the mics in the middle. So you can please walk up to the mic and ask your question or questions. We'll take 3 to 5 and then go back. And as I said, we'll see who is up to answering some of those challenging and complex questions that I'm expecting. And I see Charlotte, please, and introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you. Is this on? Thank you very much. Charlotte Heberbrand. I'm the Director of Communications and Public Affairs. Congratulations to Ruth, and thanks to all the speakers for the great testimony about her important work. I wanted to add to your accolades, I think it has not been mentioned, at this last annual or triannual meeting of the International Association for Agricultural Economics, Ruth was made a lifetime fellow, honorary lifetime fellow, which I think speaks a lot to this coming together of mixed methods. And then I wanted to, maybe this is more for the room and for the panel up here, do we anticipate tougher waters ahead when it comes to gender research, and just interested in your reflections, if that's okay to ask. Thank you.
It's a great way to summarize Ruth's work. Tougher waters ahead for gender. In the back, please, and also introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Wei Jiang. I'm a senior research fellow in the Natural Resources and Resilience Unit at IFPRI. So I am enthusiastic about shifting our mindset and approach to transdisciplinary approach, and I'm also wary of the challenges ahead. So I think coming into our partners and communities with a good willingness to collaborate, our research skills and our passion for a better world may not be enough. So I mean, just the sense of us in this together, the trust and the willingness to take risk and share risk are also quite important to me. Obviously, Ruth, you have such wonderful interpersonal skills that would help tremendously with such approach. But yeah, you know, I wish we could learn more and spend more time with you to learn those skills. But if you could also give us some word of wisdom in terms of, you know, advices, how do we make meaningful contribution to transdisciplinary approach? Thanks.
Okay, coaching as an additional stacked activity, and Carol's smile is still there. And now we have a third question, please.
Yes, thank you. My name is Blake Ratner. I lead an organization called Collaborating for Resilience, and Ruth has been our founding chair on the advisory committee. And I guess my question is for you, Ruth. It's about being able to navigate that connection between research and partnerships that you spoke about, particularly coming from an institution that, if you were critical, you might say, emphasized years ago impact as a characteristic of the journal that you publish in, rather than the partnerships that you work through. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. That's an interesting question too. And another organization that we just learned about. And yes, one more question.
Hi, my name is Talib Kılıç. I'm a manager in Development Data Group at the World Bank. I've had the honor to actually formally collaborate with Ruth over the past couple of years in this development of the women's empowerment metric for national systems. I felt a lot of emotions, although a lot of the work that has been presented today, I have been familiar with, but hearing from other people describe your contributions really was, I felt an impact on a personal level. Ruth, I have two questions, introspective, so non-technical, non-work related. What would you say was the biggest strength that you drew on consistently over all these years of work at IFPRI? And secondly, what do you feel most hopeful about as you now start a new chapter? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And while our, I think, last question approaches the mic, I'll add in the online question that we got, at least one of them, by Jean-Paul Karani. The question is, what are the main challenges you identify to make the food futures more inclusive in an African context? So another challenging question, and now we have our last in-person question, and I think then we hand over to the panel. It's a lot already. Please.
Hello, I'm Werner Kiene. I have reached long ago that stage of retiring, but I can also tell you I retired now 7 or 8 times after my initial retirement. But I also think I speak not only on my own behalf, but on behalf of the many colleagues I've worked with. And I think particularly about my colleagues in the World Food Program, who really appreciated me including the making sense of what we are doing through your work. And that's something quite important for many who are in the trenches and don't have time to read all the research in detail. But making sense, and your charts here and your graphs show how important this is. I have a question on how you see the essence of your work being applicable and used in the emergency area. When I joined the World Food Program as the first director for evaluation, we were a development organization. Now I'm still part of what you will also be at one point, kind of the alumni work, and we meet, but everything is about emergency. So how does this address the emergency issues? Thank you.
Okay, so I'll hand this over to Ruth, I think, to manage who can answer the questions. But I think a lot are obviously direct to you, but feel free to reach out to everyone here in the first row or anyone else in the room. And yeah, but over to you, Ruth, to address these interesting, as I expected, complex questions.
Yeah, any of the rest of you want to take these? It's all a collaborative effort here. I mean, I think the first question on the navigating the rough waters, do either of you want to take that up?
Since I'm not a government employee, maybe I should take that one. And I don't know, Vicki might also have some things. I mean, I think, you know, one of the things that I wanted to go back to on that question was your point about interdisciplinary work requires mutual respect. And I feel, unfortunately, that we are entering a world or a phase, shall we say, where there is going to be less and less of that. And you know, the only way to combat that, of course, is to go on working in a respectful way and encouraging everyone else that you're interacting with to do so. But it is a little daunting to think about all of the global challenges that we are facing, and yet the leadership that we are expecting to be coming in the near term seems much more interested in battling than in actually collaborating. And so that's not a very hopeful outlook, but then I also do see, you know, in my work, you know, where when I started, gender was an afterthought in the discussions, and now it is forefront. I mean, I don't have to convince any of my colleagues that they need to pay attention to women's land rights in their work. It's automatic. We still don't have all the answers to how to do it, but, you know, the discussion is ongoing. So I guess that gives me hope to some extent that we can continue to change the world in a positive way, even as we deal with a more and more difficult environment.
And I can just maybe add this, that I think one thing that Vicki mentioned, and I think a lot of what we talked about here, is the power of research and evidence. I think that kind of, I'm speaking from the gender perspective, we over the years built a very robust, thanks to you, thanks to many people in the room, evidence base that really shows, that doing gender is the smart thing, right? We sort of kind of go back to that. It is the right thing, but it's also the smart thing. So that I think that kind of evidence will drive and continue to drive our work as much as we can. Yeah.
I'd like to speak a little bit to.
Yeah, sorry,
Vicki, go
I'll
ahead.
just add very quickly, at the Gates Foundation, we and at the influence, of the headwinds, and they're not good, including the decrease in resources in ODA that's going to be available to the things we care about. So the foundation's stand on this is that we have to double down, but on the other hand, there is pressure to get more focused. And so for the gender and women's empowerment work, there's a lot more pressure now to tell us what works. We've been investing and documenting for years, so now we need to know what works so we can focus on that, given the limited pools. So more and more pressure on that. Thanks.
If I might make a couple of comments on transdisciplinarity, and I've been thinking a lot about how and why scientists of different disciplines would come together, and I'm coming to the view that it really comes down to how we understand, of course, reality, but specifically in my field, humans in the environment, and it's for me it's brought me to think more rigorously about socio-ecological systems. And just a quick anecdote, I read a wonderful study recently by a group of scientists working in Guyana with the aim of improving biodiversity conservation in indigenous communities. And they found a number of things that basically provided evidence that people manage their landscapes to enhance and maintain biodiversity. They burn areas for certain management purposes very carefully, the right conditions, And the scientists noticed that 5 bird species, the population increased after the burning. Okay, so, but the indigenous people, the community always understood, they know what they're doing. You know, they're of the fabric of that landscape, and they're managing it for a variety of social and ecological purposes. Research with FES in India has found recently that biodiversity is higher in communities that we studied in Meghalaya, in forests, than in forests that are not under the management of communities, you know, of actually people, you know. So understanding, you know, and this is a huge invitation for ecologists and social scientists to engage, because those relationships cannot be understood without that kind of collaboration.
Okay, so to try and weave together a couple of these connections, starting with the headwinds. I know we've gone a long way from going women in development to gender. I think gender has taken on, in the US at least, a different set of baggage. And one reason I think IFPRI's gender work was taken seriously way before I ever came here, partly because male economists were doing quantitative studies that showed this was, and several of them became our director generals. So that helped. But we used a very instrumental approach to show that the status of women was important for a lot of other things that people care about. So that may be a strategy. And to give you an anecdote that may weave to some of these other things, I was standing in a line for lunch next to David Beckman, who was at that time head of Bread for the World, an advocacy organization here in the US. And I said, you know, I'm a great admirer of Bread for the World, but why don't you pick up the issue of, you know, women's empowerment, or whatever the phrase was at the time? And he stood there and just thought about it for a minute, and he said, you know, that would resonate across the aisle in the US Congress. That's something you can get people, we could get people to come together around. So I think, so I use that also to say that I think one of the important things in my philosophy is planned serendipity. You take advantage of these opportunities, like being in the line, and you make connections with people on a personal level and eat and drink with them, if possible. You know, you find, and this I learned, Vicki, from the women's leadership training that I, you know, under the Gender and Diversity program, is when you connect outside of just your work roles, you will develop better teams and you will go farther. And that's that bringing the whole person to this. So Werner, I'm going to point you to Katrina Kosick about the emergency areas, because I think she's making those connections. Although, yeah, okay, and we can have longer talk over lunch or whenever. But to Talib's point then, is the biggest strength I've drawn on? It's probably right back there, Carol. And by allowing me, encouraging me to put my whole self into this, and putting up with what another Nobel laureate has called greedy jobs, but also bringing the kids along so that they saw why this was important. The big gift was, he said, another big gift was that when I went on trips, instead of just cutting it to the bare minimum, such that I went to the meeting and I came back, you know, on that first flight out, he said, do something special in that place. It gave me a greater appreciation of the places. I got insights. Adding on a side trip with a colleague, you see amazing things, you connect, and so I think that is, don't just cut yourself down to the minimum you can do for the work part of it, but make the connections. And the most hopeful thing, I guess, Talib, is that it's no long. I really think we are at the point on gender that somebody, CETA, said they didn't like the term gender mainstreaming. They wanted gender integration where, to the point that it's like the IT department. You can't think about doing without it. And just because it's being done everywhere doesn't mean you quit investing in moving it forward. I really hope the same thing applies to the natural resources, institutions in natural resources work, that we recognize that this cannot be solved by technocratic processes. We have to look at the people side of it and bring this together. And I guess what I'm really hopeful of is looking out here and thinking about all these amazing people who are working in this space. So,
Okay, thank you. I have to, I unfortunately have to cut this, off now, but it is, excellent words of wisdom, but as we've heard, Ruth will not completely disengage. So the first engagement for everyone in the room is out in the hall. There is lunch. So I hope we actually have another event here. So I actually need to ask you to step out and you'll, and take your lunch. And there's one little thing.
Ruth would like to have everybody who has ever co-authored a paper with her and get a group photo
Outside.
Don't leave if you've ever co-authored with underlines
Ruth has more than 500 co-authors. It's a little analysis we did. She has more than 500. I'm not sure how many people we have in the room, but I guess 120 or so of her co-authors are here. So please, if you would step out. Excellent. Thanks again for everyone to come and to learn about Ruth's contributions. Thank you. Outside? No.